Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Many Faces of Sinai with Dr. John Kelsen. The revelation at Mount Sinai is a pivotal moment in Torah, but is it entirely unique? Join us for a special pre-Shavuot investigation into the multiple Sinaitic moments in the Torah's narrative. It's a pleasure learning with Dr. Rabbi Dr. Kelsen today. He is the Chief Education Officer at Drisha. And sources will be shared in chat shortly once Rabbi Kelsen gets underway. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Rabbi Kelsen.
Okay, thank you so much, Kayla. Great to be here. And thank you, Kayla, for setting us up here. So we are approaching Shavuot, Zamad Matan Toratenu. And we want to take a few minutes today. Thanks for joining us today as we prepare for Shavuot together. I say together, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, that we sort of do this together as one. And for those who've learned with me in the past, as you know, I have some things I would like to share, but part of the process, inherent to the process is people talking, sharing, and creating kind of a chabura here. So please do share. You have source sheets as Kayla mentioned, and with that we'll begin our march towards Sinai. So when you read the book of Shemot and when you take a look at our calendar, perhaps the pivotal moment in the beginning of the book, in the middle of the book, is Mount Sinai, is the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai, Zamad Matan Toratenu. That happens in chapter 19, right, of the book of Exodus. That's when we get to the mountain, Vayichan Shem Yisrael Neged Ahar, right, and the Torah is given. But as I was thinking about Shavuot this year, I've been noticing that Sinai has many faces. Sinai has many faces. The midrash I gave you to at the end of their source sheet, but I'll say it now. Maybe we'll get to it at the end as well. From the Psikha Rav Kahana, the midrash notes that when God gives the Torah, God does so with many faces. Sometimes God does with the face of a stern God. Sometimes God gives the Torah with the face of a jovial God or a winking God or a kind God. And these are all different faces of the divine as revealed through Torah. Indeed, the Midrash goes on to note, sometimes we receive the Torah differently. One Torah is also, one face is given, but because all of us have different faces, we receive it differently. However one slices it, Shivim Panim Torah, there's many faces to Torah. And what I've been noticing, and I want to sort of learn with you today and explore, is that Sinai, however, though it appears, most literally in chapter 19, it appears multiple times. It appears before, it appears after. And I wanted to sort of demonstrate that, or try to demonstrate that. You'll have to be the judge of whether it has been demonstrated. And then think together about what we might make of that. Why might the Torah be interested in presenting Sinai not just as one moment in chapter 19, but as Sinai as perhaps a template of experience? So without further ado, your source sheets, open up with chapter 3. Right? And chapter 3 follows of the book of Exodus. Israel is enslaved in Egypt at this point, and we've met Moshe, we've met Moses, Moses, the one drawn from the water, the son who is drawn from the water. We've met Moses already. Moses has grown up of Agdal Moshe and has fled Egypt upon word spreading that he's interceded, and has struck down the Egyptian who was striking the Israelite. Goes to Midian, goes to Midian. We know the story. There he is. He saves the daughters of the priests of Midian. He marries one of the daughters. He lives there. His daughter Tzipporah. They have a son there by Krochim Gershom Ki Amar Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nachoya, the end of chapter 2. And then it was after those many days, Vayamim Harabim, and the king of Egypt dies. Israel is groaning from their avodah, and finally, in the silence and in the servitude of Egypt, Chani asks for the sources again, Kayla, into the chat. it was that for the midst of that servitude that God appears. God appears again in Egypt, or the period of Egypt. God hears, Vayizaku, Vayishma, Elohim et Nakatam, and God remembers God's covenant, Vayizkor Brito, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God sees and God knows. Vayar Elohim, Vayeda Elohim. And that is the context, the immediately preceding verses before we get to chapter 3. Moshe Haya, back to Moses. And God, we know that since Vayar Elohim, Vayeda Elohim, apparently what's about to happen is some sort of expression of, or an unfolding of God's seeing and knowing and remembering. Little does Moses know that this is about to occur, perhaps. So Moshe Haya, Moses, meanwhile, is Ro'eh et Son Yitro Chotno Kohen Midyan. Moses has been tending the flock. He is the shepherd. He is a shepherd and shepherding the flock of Yitro Chotno Kohen Midyan, of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And Moses, by the way, might be very attached to and comfortable with his identity as son-in-law of Yitro Kohen Midyan. I say that because he's previously named his son, born to him by Tzipporah, daughter of that priest, Gershom ki amar ger hayiti be'eretz nachriya. I have been a stranger in a foreign land. And if we assume that he's referring not to Midian but to Egypt, if we make that assumption, then if he was a stranger there, perhaps now he is home. Perhaps now he has found his peace. And he's shepherding his father-in-law's flocks. And he drives the flock into the desert or into the wilderness. Vayavo el har Elohim Choreva. And he comes to the mountain of God. He comes to Chorev. Now, the Torah can be read sequentially, but also hafochba v'hafochba, sort of in a circular manner, the way that we do. And we know, upon reading this, we know of chapter 19. And we know that Moshe, the faithful shepherd, the Zohar calls Moshe the Raya Mehemna, the faithful shepherd. This is not the last time that Moses will guide a flock into the desert, to the mountain of God of Chorev. This is a precursor, if you will, to the role of Moshe, not Moshe, only the son-in-law of Kohen Midyan, but Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe the faithful shepherd. And he brings him to Har Elohim Choreva. Interesting, does he know that this is the mountain of God? Do we only know this is the mountain of God? That's left unclear, right? Perhaps ambiguous. It is the place, however, which is Choreva, which, as Ibn Ezra suggests, is a place which is dry, right? A place which is not alive. And in a sense, right, this is Moshe who's drawn out from the water. This is the opposite. It's kind of an antonym for Egypt, because Egypt is the place of water, the place of the Nile, a place full of water. And you come to the desert. The desert is the anti-Egypt in that sense. So Moses brings his sheep to the place after Egypt, if you will, the anti-Egypt, right? To the place which is Chorev, the place which is Choreva. Now, later on, we are going to come to, in chapter 19, assuming that this is the very self-same mountain, whether it is, topographically or only literarily, we end up with the same result. He'll be here again. There it's called, he brings him to the desert, and there it's called Har Sinai. It's called Har Sinai, Mount Sinai. Here it's not called Mount Sinai, it's called Choreva. It's called Chorev, right? To Chorev. But the notion of Sinai is evoked in the very next verse, not once, but 3 times, if we read it a certain way. Vayera malach Hashem elav balabat esh mitocha sneh. And if you look at the Ibn Ezra's long commentary, Ibn Ezra Perish HaAruch, on this verse, you'll see he's trying to understand what's this language of sneh, what is it? And he suggests at the end that he thinks it's basically a thorn bush. And he says, Kacha hu b'lashon Yishmael, actually in Arabic it has a similar meaning. And then he says, the Kacha Har Sinai ba'avor hasneh. And Har Sinai is also called Sinai because of the sneh. Okay, the note there in my Torah Chaim says, what does he mean? It's called Sinai because there must have been a sneh, maybe particularly noteworthy sneh, a sneh which grows upon it. Okay, meaning you have the mountain and on top of it is the sneh. That's possible. That's possible. It's also possible that Sinai is called Sinai because for whatever reason it's called that. But the Torah here 3 times makes a point of saying the sneh, the sneh, the sneh. Again, for the reader who reads it, by which I mean you know what's coming up, and then you go back and reread it in the beginning. We hear here perhaps precursors to Sinai. So he comes to the sneh, to the sneh, to the sneh. He comes to Sinai here. And this Sinai, like the Sinai we have later on, will be a Sinai which has a fire on it. Right? There's a fiery presence upon this mountain, the sneh Sinai. Now, I'll say, interestingly, the sneh here is the hinei hasneh boer ba'esh. The sneh is burning, is all aflame with this fire, but the hasneh einenu ukal. But the sneh, the bush, is not devoured. The midrash and the commentaries, right, for millennia have sat upon that image, the imagery of the bush which is not consumed. What do we make of that? Perhaps that's Israel not being consumed. Perhaps, as very sober suggested to me, perhaps it's God's presence itself. If the fire represents God's presence remains, albeit in a sort of a quieter, flickering sense. But be that as it may, it anticipates the fire on Sinai, and yet is distinguished from the fire on Sinai, because in this fire on Sinai, we're told, I believe it's in chapter 24, that there it is an Eish Ochelet, right? There it is an all-consuming fire, right? That is how God is presented later on Sinai. So it is of a similar sort, but different, right? This is a much more of a muted revelation. And it's muted not only in the sense of the fire, and we're going to hear, of course, now in a moment that God will appear out of that fire and issue words. We haven't heard God speak in quite a while. God will issue words and actually a command. Again, anticipating Sinai, or said differently, this is Moses' Sinai. I think I called it scene 1 on the source sheet. Sinai, scene 1. The flickering flame upon the mountain. But Moses on the mountain it's true, he's there alone in chapter 19 and 20, etc., etc. He's there, but here he's really alone. Here the faithful shepherd is without his, not yet Moshe Rabbeinu. He's just with his flocks. And in that muted revelation, the alone meets the alone, if you will. It's the singular Moses who encounters the flickering flame, and there he encounters, it's not the kol gadol, the thunder, right, and the lightning and the sound and the fury. It's something that as he's shepherding, catches his eye. Okay, Nachmanides deals with this at length in his commentary. Take a look there. Moses sees. What does he see? He sees first the physical, material phenomenon of a flame and a sneh, which as he notices long enough to see that it's not being burnt out, though it should be quick kindling. And then he goes closer and he sees this, and he beckons, he prepares himself for prophecy, as the Ramban says, but we'd say he's noticing, coming closer and closer and closer. So he comes to sneh, hinei hasneh boer ba'esh v'hasneh einenu ukal. And Moses says, Moshe, asura na ve'eret hamareh gadol hazeh, madua lo yivar hasneh. He asks a question. He says, let me come over, and we stop and take a look and understand, why is this sneh not burning out? Why is it not burning out? I have to say, it reminds me, this question he's asking, it reminds me of the Midrash, which says that in telling the story of Avram, when Avram first, discovers God, right? So, and hears Lech Lecha. So the Midrash of the Birah Doleket, Brishit Rabbah, of the palace, which is aflame or illuminated, depending on how you read it, through the lenses of which Hasidic master, but that's not our topic right now. But my point is that I wonder, the source for that Midrash, as James Kugel suggests, is in a language that Avram comes from Or Kastim. He comes from Or, from a place of fire. So when he comes from a place of fire, a place of illumination, he comes from the Birah Doleket. That's where Abram comes from before he receives the Lech Lecha. But I also actually wonder if it comes from here as well. Madua lo yivar hasna. He has a question. He's a question about, there's a different question. Mikan bal. Here's a different question, but there's some sort of similarity there. I think there's Madua lo yivar hasna. Vayar Hashem kistarot vayikra elav Elohim mitoch hasna vayomer Moshe Moshe vayomer hineni. A great covenantal moment. Moshe, it says to him twice, and he says hineni. Okay, and any student of Genesis or other, right, Shmuel knows the name, the call of the name, Avram, right? Avram, hineni, right? And here actually, I wonder if there's also an echo there of Abraham in chapter 22 of the book of Binding of Isaac, right? Because we'll see that the Malach or the Elohim calls him and says to him, "Don't do something." So I wonder there, it's don't slaughter. Here he says, Vayomer al tikrav halom, do not come any closer, do not approach. Moses apparently is drawn to this, so he's pulled towards this phenomenon. He's pulled towards the burning bush, and he hears, "Don't come any closer." Sal na'alecha me'al raglecha, remove your shoes from upon your feet. Ki hamakom asher ata omed alav admas kodeshu, for the land, the earth upon which you stand is holy. Okay, the Midrash in, I think it's Shemot Rabbah, Ramban cites this as well, claims wherever you have Giloi Shechina, or maybe it observes, wherever you have the revelation of the Shechina, it's forbidden to wear shoes. Here, by Joshua, Joshua's the book of Joshua, he's also told, remove your shoes. And we remember the priests, the Kohanim, who must be barefoot upon their service. Okay, something about the shoe, perhaps it's about being present, or it's not treading upon, right? Not trotting upon. There's something about it. There's something about the barefootness, right? Of being, right? Reminds me of the Avel as well in our practice, right? That we don't wear our shoes when we mourn. We're present. We're not going anywhere. We're here. Whatever it may be, it's an expression or an effect of being upon sacred ground. And regardless, we learned he's standing upon holy ground. We were waiting a long time when we're reading the Chumash to hear the root of the word Kedusha, of Kuf Daled Shin. It's supposed to be a very, Mamlechet Kohanim Goy Kadosh, we're going to hear soon, right? It's supposed to be a central word, Kedoshim Tihiyu. The last time we've heard of it, unless I'm wrong, is the beginning of Genesis, and there by Shabbos, right? It's by sacred time. There we hear that God has, Vayavarech Elohim, Vayikadesh Oto, God is blessed and sanctified. Last time I heard of Kedusha. Okay? The closest we come to the idea of a explicitly holy space maybe is Jacob, Man Nora Makom Hazeh, right? Jacob at Bethel, right? That how awesome Nora and Kadosh have overlapping significations, right? But this is the first holy space, right? And in Sefer Shemot, that's very important because they're going to make the Vasuli Mikdash v'Shachanti b'Tocham. Okay, the Mikdash, the Mishkan, right? It's very important when we have, right? Very central to have a sacred space. This is the first sacred space actually, and here's just Moshe. The mountain turns out to be, or the top of the mountain turns out to be holy. Will there be another mountain which is holy? Of course, and that is Mount Sinai proper. And this again, the Ramban notes this very explicitly. It's on your source sheet. I won't read it inside right now. You can do Chazara later, right? But here, right, the mountain, God says that everyone has to sanctify themselves, right? In chapter 19, make sure everyone sanctify the mountain, sanctify themselves. But Yikadesh ta'am, Higbalta ta'am, make sure the people stay far away, right? Don't come close. Okay? It's clear, says Nachmanides, what's happening here with the sanctification of the mountain proper is a precursor to the moment of Har Sinai. I would call it more than a precursor. I would say it's a kind of Matan Torah. It's Moshe's Matan Torah. It's the first Matan Torah of the book. It's the first Sinai. And it doesn't stop there. If in case you weren't convinced yet, Vayomer, I'm reading verse 6 here in chapter 3, Vayomer Anochi Elohei Avicha. First he says, don't come any closer. This is holy ground. And then he says, Anochi. Now we're going to hear another Anochi, aren't we? Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, the great Anochi. The revelation of God begins with the Anochi, the giving of God's self, if you will, the revealing, the revelation of self. Here I am. Eheyeh asher eheyeh, in a sense, Anochi. Here it's Anochi Elohei Avicha. I am the God of your father, Elohei Avram, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. And inter aliyah derech agav, I would note that it's curious, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. So, what do you mean? Who is this God of the father? Who is the father? That's an interesting question. Who does Moshe think is referred to when God says the God of your father? Does he mean Amram, as some suggest? Does he not really? Does he mean Yitro? I don't know. Who does he mean? Amram is the father of I know it's called Ben Amram, but the father of Moshe has not been very present, right, in the story. He's a son to daughter of Paro. But who is his father exactly? Actually, there's a midrash which I saw, it said Elohei Avicha, that he came to him, and God comes to Avram first, to Moshe first, in the voice of Amram. Midrash and Shemot Rabbah. Interesting. Who is he referring to? I harp on this because later on in the story, right now we know he has a one son, Gershom. We're also told he has banim, so he has multiple sons. Only one has been named. Later on in Parshat Yitro, where we hear that he has another son, Elazar, right? His second son, Gershom, and am I saying correctly? 1 second, make sure I pull it up, the text correctly. Eliezer, not Elazar. Ki Elohei Avi be'ezri, because the God of my father has been in my help. V'atzileni micherev Paro. So it refers to the self-same God who has saved him, God of his father, who has saved him from the sword of Pharaoh. I want to come back to that in just a moment, but just note here, I know from Avicha, he tells him, I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. It's a fundamental revelation. Here I am that God, Anochi. And Moshe hides his face because he's afraid to look, Mehabit Elohim. He sees but doesn't see, right? He wants to see but pulls back. Later on, as Ramban notes as well, he'll have graduated to the point of perception that Tumanat Hashem Yabit, that he will gaze at some sort of visage of the Lord. But here he's afraid to look. And what is the content? If this is a Matan Torah for Avram, for Moshe, then what is the content of this Torah? Well, God says as follows. After God says, "Here's who I am," the God of the forefathers, God says, "Vayomer Hashem, I've seen, v'ora iti, I too see. I too see. And et ani ami asher Mitzrayim, and their travails, their plight, and their outcries. I am mindful. Ve'ered lahatzilo mi'amitzrayim, and I will go down to save them and to take them out of Egypt to the land of milk and honey. And you will go down, Moshe, and I will send you, and you will take them out." I would say that what the core message of this Matan Torah, it's a precursor again to Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tziticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who redeemed you from Egypt. It's that the God of the covenant, the God of the forefathers, the God of Genesis, is now going to be the God of the people. And it's this God of the people is a God who notes, who cares, who attends to the fact that these people are in servitude and are suffering, and deigns to redeem them, right? And doesn't stop there. We'll take them out and we'll redeem them. And that is and they will, yes, and we'll redeem them. And he'll send Moshe to do that. And in fact, he goes on to say, says God, that you'll redeem them and you'll bring them to worship me, tachad har hazeh. You'll bring to worship me at this mountain, right? Pointing from this mini Sinai to that Sinai. You have in a nutshell, essentially, a core Matan Torah. The God of the covenant of the forefathers is the same God who now attends to the people of Israel. And it's a God who redeems. It's a redemptive God, and it's a God who you will now, upon redemption, worship. That is, in a nutshell, a core kind of microcosm of the Matan Torah. And this is the Torah that Moshe receives. I want to just make a couple more points. While we sit here, we could spend the whole time on just these passages, but I want to just make, sort of develop a schema with you. For Moshe, as we know, there's an elaborate back and forth, and Moshe is doubtful. Moshe says, Moshe Elohim in verse 11, Mi Anochi, which is a pun, of course. On the one hand, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and redeem them? But it's also, of course, Mi Anochi, but who exactly is this great Anochi who has been revealed to me? Who are you truly? Midas Anochi, Ki Anochi Shilachticha. Who are you? Vayomer Moshe Elohim goes on, Hine Anochi Baal B'nai Israel, and then I will come, or the Anochi will come to Israel and say, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they'll say, what's God's name? What's his name? What should I tell them? So verse 14, Elohim says to Moshe, the famous line, Ehiyeh asher ehiyeh, I'll be as I will be. This is my essence, this is who I am. Vayomer, and this I really wanted to highlight, Ko tomar levinei Israel, thus shall you say to the Israelites. Very formal, prophetic language, right? Heralding a proclamation. Ko tomar levinei Israel, Ehiyeh shalachani Elohim. Ehiyeh has sent me, right? Vayomer od, Ko tomar levinei Israel, Hashem lokei avotechem, shalachani Elohim, zeh shemilo olam hazeh zechudu dor v'dor. And I highlight that because the phrase Ko tomar, and that's in El Bnei Israel, El Beit Yaakov, appears 3 times in the book of Exodus, again, here. And it appears, and I'll skip ahead right now, it appears in chapter 19, right, by Matan Torah proper, which I'll come to more in a moment. But Moshe goes to God, and God calls to him from verse 3 of chapter 19, Ko tomar leBeit Yaakov v'taged leBnei Israel. It's as if the reader has been waiting, right, since that first Ko tomar for this Ko tomar, and it signals a connection between the two, right? And what does it say there? Lo and behold, Atem reitem asher asiti, you saw what I did, and I brought you out of Egypt. And now, im shamo tishmu lekoli u'shmartim et briti, if you will listen to my covenant, then you will be segula mikol ha'amim ki li kol ha'aretz, so all the land is mine. And the famous words, Vatem tihiyu li mamlecha kohanim v'goy kadosh, and you will be unto me a nation of a kingdom, a priest, and a holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to Israel. And I would claim that this too is right, it picks up from where we left off, the last Ko tomar. And it's another mini scene of a Matan Torah here in the 3rd month. Here again at Minbar Sinai, there at the mountain, Moses goes up to God, Ko tomar leBeit Yaakov. So the Ko tomar I'm claiming is a type scene signifier for the Sinaitic moments in Sefer Shemot, and there will also be a 3rd, but we'll have to say that for now. Here, of course, again we have the Kadosh, but it's not the Adma Kodesh; it's the Mamlecha Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh, which is not to the exclusion of, but a part and parcel of the kedusha of the space. It's actually, if you think about it, Mamlecha Kohanim, the Goy Kadosh, and I would actually also add Kili Kol Haaretz. It is pointing towards what we call Sefer Vayikra, Torah Kohanim. That is where the notion of Mamlechet Kohanim, Goy Kadosh, Kadoshim Tihiyu, the book of Leviticus is the most full exposition or elaboration upon this moment in Sinai. Even Kili Kol Haaretz in the end of the Sefer Vayikra, God says explicitly Kili Kol Haaretz to circle back to this moment. Okay, so back to our story. However, this was just to demonstrate that our pre-Sinaitic Sinai in chapter 3 with Moshe alone, that indeed heralds as meant to evoke the Sinai coming up later on. What do we make of Moshe having his own Sinai? Okay, so I want to make the claim in summary. This would be its own shir, but just in summary that Moshe, Ger Hayiti be'eretz Nachriya, I've been a stranger. Moshe, who has been drawn out from the water. Moshe, who encounters something like the angel of death, right? Has to spread blood not on the doorpost, but on the body at the mysterious Malone. Moshe undergoes in his own person, in his own biography, in his own story, much of what the people of Israel must undergo in their grand narrative, in their grand story of the enslavement in Egypt, of their experience of confrontation with death, of the Karban Pesach, right? Of the coming through the waters, being drawn out from the waters. And Moshe also has to encounter God at Sinai. And Moshe undergoes all of this in his own microcosm. Actually, the notion of the singular, right, Sinaitic moment is picked up by, and this we can't get into here, but picked up by a particular figure. I would call him a second Moshe figure in Tanakh. It's probably multiple second Moshes. I guess Joshua is as well. But here I'm thinking of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. As we know, and this is also in your short sheet in the book of Kings, Elijah, in great frustration, flees to the desert, to the Har Chorev, right? And has to sustain himself for 40 days and 40 nights. It's clear that he is seeking again, whether he himself as the character or the story speaking on him, he himself is experiencing once again, right, the experience of Moshe in the leader alone. He has to go back to that experience, right, to find God. And what we discover there, as Eliyahu discovers, is God is not in the great noise, right, and not in the great wind. God's not found, at least not found only in chapter 19 of Exodus, I'd say. But the kol d'mama daka, it's the muted, the silence. I actually had the privilege recently to spend some time in the Arava, in the desert. I thank Trisha for support, sending me on an educator's retreat there for a day, and I slept in the Arava. And it's clear that in the silence and the solitude and the aloneness of that desert, right, it's clear why we understand that would be a source where Elijah would go, why Moses has to go, why Torah is always given in the desert. Right? Because in that silence and in that dak, in that fineness, you can perhaps in the silence hear something. Right? There he hears God's voice, kol d'mama daka, and here as well Moshe hears the flickering and the muted revelation. Moses hears the revelation at Sinai, a precursor to it. This has been scene one. Let me just pause for a moment. Any reflections or thoughts? I think unclear. Anything you want to add? Please feel free. And just jump in. You don't have to.
I had not really noticed the detail that the priests serve barefoot.
Yeah.
Until you called it out for us a few minutes ago. And I find that so beautiful on a bunch of different ways. When we come into the world, we're barefoot. When we go out of the world, we're barefoot. They put our shroud on us and all that, but essentially we're barefoot. And I personally have a habit when I come home, first thing I do is take my shoes off. And I don't do it for cleanliness. It's nothing like that. I don't make anybody else take their shoes off at my house. I just want to feel whatever I'm standing on under my feet, whether it's tile or wood or a rug, or I go outside and I'm standing on grass. And I personally can't dance with shoes on. So the whole idea of that the priestly service is barefoot and that Moshe's taken his shoes off when he sees the bush, I just find that so many things, the confluence of so many different things, just in that one little simple detail, and I just love that. DeBarty.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and it's a midrash in Shemot Rabbah. Just again to make it clear that the connection is explicit. And let me just, if I didn't say this clearly enough, I'll say it now that we're not going to cover all the Sinais, all the multiple Sinais in the Chumash, let alone Tanakh. Clearly, as this has been well established, that the Mishkan is an inheritor, right, of the Sinaitic moment and cloud and place of revelation, etc. Right, and that signified very clearly here. I think that Moses takes off, or picked up on the midrash at least, that Moses takes off his shoes here. He must take off his shoes as he comes to the sacred space, Ad Kodesh, and so too we find in the Mishkan.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I understand that you can't daven without your shoes.
Actually,
Isn't that
right. right. I think it depends on the right. Halakhically, we say that one is meant to daven in the way that they would walk in the street out of a sense of respect. Um, so that is interesting. And there are people who daven without their shoes, by the way.
Really? That's okay?
Whatever. I didn't say it's okay. I said there are those people who daven without their shoes.
On
They know
Yom
this
Kippur, I've seen
and
that.
they do anyway. On Yom Kippur also, right? But people usually don't daven barefoot on tile. Right? There's a different.
Yeah.
There's a
No,
separate,
they're all wearing
separate issue.
socks. The
Right.
the ones I've seen. I also have a question
Exactly.
about the practice in the ancient Near East about
I wonder that as
taking
well, of
shoes
course.
off to as a sign of respect or something. I mean, I
Yeah,
know this is special, but
right. I don't know exactly. I was thinking about that as well. Right. I think we'd have to,
right.
think
But
about this.
anyway, okay.
The other people, by the way, I can't get into it right now, but this is a footnote since we went there, and then I have to bring us back to this, is that there's another ritual which might shed light. I forget who I saw mention this, but a ritual of removing shoes, and it's by chalitza. Right, by
Oh,
chalitza in
right.
Yibum, right, the left, right. So if one does not, right, the woman who is the widow, right, if he's not going to, the landlord is not going to, marry her, then or claim her, then, right, then she removes the shoe, right, beit chalitza nal, right. So what's that about? So someone made a claim, might have to do something about relinquishing, moments of relinquishing ownership, relinquishing stake. And that might relate to the holy, where we sort of relinquish our sense of ownership in the holy. Okay, I'll leave that for now. Let's close that just because it's too far off ground, but something interesting. Yes, Bruce, hi.
So I've always puzzled about this since I was in college. Have you ever heard anybody explain why JTS, why they have that as that's their symbol over the archway when you go in? Hasne enenu ukal. Like we used to call the JTSers Bushmen.
Mm-hmm.
But why, there still is, what did they mean? Like whoever did that, what did they mean and what do they mean? And do they still mean it?
Again, another interesting question, which I simply don't know. I could speculate, but I won't take your time with my speculation. Okay, so yes, Bella.
Hi. My screen is wrong and I can't see anybody. But to me, the first thing I think about is that the Muslims pray without their shoes on.
Yeah, right. Well, we covered that.
If anybody should have done it, it should have been us because, you see, that's the first thing Moshe does is told, take off your shoes. And as you mentioned, the priests, which we've all heard about.
Which we maintain when we duchen, right? When priests bless the congregation, so they take off their shoes. So okay, so that is a whole interesting world. So we had this Sinai, this one Sinai before Sinai. Let me just take us through two more, and then we can sort of reflect. And here I'll be a little more brief as I've tried to sort of. I've already greased the wheels, I think, of the interpretive wheels of this. But if you take a look at after the crossing of the sea, so in chapter 15, which I think is called scene 2 on your source sheets, by Mara and Elim. Here I've actually said this in other Jewish shiurim, so I'll be a little bit quicker. But basically, they finish Matan Torah, they finish, Kriyat Yamsuf, right, crossing the sea and singing the song as Yashir, and Miriam as well, right, and Neviah, right, she leads the women as well in the song. And in verse 22. We have Moses causing Israel to leave Yam Suf, which is an interesting term, right? Vayasa, Midrash has it, he had sort of pulled them away from gathering the gold and such. But I would note that that also, to me at least, sounds like he's sort of hurting them, right? And it goes back to that shepherd notion. He has to cause them to travel. And Vayitzeu el Midbar Shor, they come to the desert, Midbar Shor, and they go 3 days into the desert. And 3 days is very important. This Rabbi Alex Israel first alerted me to, although I now have a different interpretation, that we're told earlier that Moses is to tell Pharaoh that he needs to take the people 3 days into the desert, right, to worship God. So the 3 days is a journey in Tanakh. Okay, but here's a journey to worship God. And so when we read that they left the height of Kriyat Yamsuf, and they go into the desert, Shalosh Yamim Bamidbar, you might expect, and they come to the mountain, and there they, right, something like this. Instead, V'lo matzu umayim, they don't find water. So it's a frustration, right, of the reader's anticipation. It's a frustration, the Israelites' anticipation of what shall occur 3 days in. And I want to just kind of tweak that in a moment. But they come to this place where there's no water. And they come to a place called Mara, bitterness, right, Marata, and they couldn't drink the water from the bitterness, Ki Marimheim, because the waters are bitter, or maybe they are bittered, right? I've claimed in other respects, right? Akin Karashima Mara, this harkens back to Egypt, right? They have the Egypt still within them. You can take the Israelites out of Egypt, but you can't take the Egypt out of the Israelites. Not quite yet, at least. They're still enslaved there, they're still bitter, and they complain, what should we drink? And they cry out to God, and God, by Yorehu Hashem eats. God shows him, but more instructs him, Hora'ah, Lashon Torah, right? God instructs him regarding a particular eight, and he throws it into the water, and the waters are sweetened. And here's the kicker, right? Sham samlo choku mishpat v'sham nisahu. And there is a giving of a Torah of sorts. By Yorehu, he's given the sham samlo choku mishpat. Now, what's the content of that choku mishpat? Okay, well, the Torah text goes on to say, and this might be the choku mishpat referred to, right, in a sense. By Yomer im shamoa tishma l'kol Hashem, it's covenantal language. If you hearken to the voice of God and do the right thing in God's eyes and listen to God's mitzvot and guard all of the laws, the chukim, then everything that happened in Egypt essentially will be gone, I would say. And then you'll really have left Egypt. All of the diseases of Egypt, right, won't come upon you. I am Hashem, your healer, or your redeemer. And the Midrash notes, it says what was given here are, you'll see that Shtabat, right, and Dimim, multiple things which are alluded to in later parts of the text about the man, etc. But there's some sort of revelation here. And if so, this is some sort of revelation, then we are poised to understand the next verse, I think, in a different light. They come to a place called Elim, and there are 12 and 70. 12 springs of water, and Shivim Tamarim, and 70 date palm trees. And they camp there by the water. Why do we care that there are 12 Mayim and 70 palm trees? It's a lot, and it's really helpful. If you're thirsty and you're hot to have such things. But what the Chumash is doing again is hafochba v'hafochba, read on and then read backwards, and then read on and then read backwards, is we'll encounter 70 and 12 again in the same book, in the book of Shemot. Where do we encounter 70 and 12 again? After Matan Torah, I think it's in chapter 24, another Sinaitic moment. Early in the morning, Moshe sets up 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. And then Moshe and Aaron, Nadav and Abihu, and the 70 elders go up, and they see what they see. They have a vision of God. So the 70 and 12 here is, among other things, not just a lot, right? It's not just one ma'ayan for each of the tribes. It's hearkening, or it's alerting you that just like by Sinai proper, there's 70 and 12. Here you're already at Sinai. And I want to go back to what Rabbi Israel said, what Alex said, and tweak it. I think he's totally correct, Alex. It's very astute. I owe this to him. That the reader, when he encounters 3 days, will think, 3 days is supposed to be giving of the Torah, or something like this, worshiping God. But it's frustrated. You come to lack of water. So on the one level, it's true. But on another level, actually, it is the culmination and fulfillment of the promise, because they do come to Sinai after 3 days. It's the Sinai of Mara. It's the Sinai of Elim. Sham Samlo Choku Mishpat V'Sham Yisahu, a different type of Sinai. And this is a Sinai of not the Aseret Debrot as we know them explicitly, but the Sinai, and here I'm also taking my cue from the Ramban's commentary on the spot. This is a Sinai of something much more primal. This is a Sinai of lack of water. This is a Sinai of the straits of the Egypt after Egypt. This is the Sinai of what do you do when you encounter scarcity in a place without abundance, what do you do in the desert? How will you be? And the Ramban talks about this. Ramban talks about essentially what I would call the derech eretz kadma Torah. This is the basic primal doing the yashar in God's eyes, listening to God, right? Doing that which is right, encountering the difficulties, and seeing what do you do, right, within those trials and travails. Who will you become? Who will you be there? The temptation is to be the complaining people. They'll do that again. But the opportunity is to become the people who encounter Sham Lochok Mishpav or Sham Yisahu. And by the way, it's perhaps not coincidental that the rabbis read this quote unquote metaphorically. The rabbis, Maran Bava Kama, sources our custom of reading the Torah every 3 days to this passage. Because here they went 3 days and didn't encounter water. In Mayim Ella Torah, water is Torah. And therefore, we make sure we never do that again. We never go 3 days without publicly celebrating and learning Torah together, Mondays and Thursdays and Shabbat. We never go more than 3 days without publicly doing that. And the Gemara sources that here. I say metaphorically, maybe the Chazal understand, yeah, because this is water, but it's also Torah. Depends on what level you're reading. So here is the Sinai number 2. And it has its own feel and its own flavor. It has its own face. And let me offer one more Sinai of the many. I hope I'm demonstrating to you the many in the book besides 19 and 20, right? The major moments of Seres HaDibrot and the Ten Commandments, those major Sinai. I thought getting into Parshat Bahar Sinai, which is also another imagery of Sinai. I thought getting into the Har Gerizim and Har Eval, the book of Deuteronomy, which is another Sinai, right? I'm trying to demonstrate a schema, and you'll develop it and take it in your own directions. But I said Kotamar appears, right, 3 times. Kotamar in chapter 3 over there. Kotamar we just saw in chapter 19. And I want to sort of conclude our brief study with chapter, I call the 3rd scene, I think, on the source sheet, the end of chapter 20. I've always been sort of drawn to this passage. It's after the Aseret HaDibrot, after that great revelation. And verse 19 of chapter 20, Perek Chaf, Pasuk Yutet, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Ko Tomar el Bnei Yisrael. And I hope by now I've primed us to prick our ears and, open our eyes. Ko Tomar, right? So it's the book signaling to us this is the 3rd moment, the 3rd Ko Tomar. Ko Tomar el Bnei Yisrael. Atem ri'item ki min hashamayim dibarti imachem. You have seen that I spoke to you, I God from heaven. Therefore, don't make for me Elohei Chesef, Elohei Zahav. Don't make gods of silver, gods of gold. What I want is an earthen mizbeach adama. I want an earthen, simple altar that you can offer your sacrifices on it. B'chol makom, any place that I mention my name, or you mention my name, I will bless you there. Any place. If you do insist, if you do end up making mizbach avanim, one out of stone, put no sword upon it, right? It should be unhewn. And do not ascend my altar by steps. Don't reveal your nakedness upon it. These are the verses coming after Matan Torah, after the Ten Commandments. What are they doing here? And in combination, if you will, of Ramban and Sforno, I want to, especially Sforno here, I want to suggest that this is, in a sense, this 3rd Ko Tamar is, in a sense, its own version of Matan Torah. And this is a Matan Torah which says, remember that God spoke from the heavens. You on earth have to have a worship and an orientation of simplicity and of humility. No golden and silver gods, no fancy altars, no mishkan. The Sforno suggests, this is what's really, that this passage is kind of plan A. It's the potential follow-up to the 10 Commandments before the sin of the golden calf. Of course, a god of gold itself. Okay, this is a follow-up in which rather than the ornate and sequestered sacred space of the Mishkan. Right? God is worshipped everywhere through the simple Mizbach Adama, without the human tools, right, of the sword, which are hewing and profaning the stone, whether it be due to the violence of the sword itself, or whether it just be due to the human element, which is embodied, encapsulated in the metal tool. And act with humility, lo tegaler v'atacha alav, act with humility, right, and sniyut, I'd say, with regards to the altar. In other words, this is a different picture of the rest of the Torah, a potential different Mount Sinai. It actually sounds to me, again, it feels to me akin to the simplicity of the Kol D'Madbaka of Elijah, or of the flickering flame of Moshe. It's a different Sinai. Now, there will be a Sinai with its own tone. You can imagine our history and our path, right? Had this been where the story ended, that was the Sinai. Now, it's not the only Sinai. There's also the Sinai of the Mishkan, which is so different than this Sinai. There's multiple Sinais, and I want to close with that point, which I opened with, and then we'll talk together for a few minutes. There are many faces. Shivim Panim. There are 70 faces to the Torah. There are 70 faces to Sinai. There are many faces to Sinai. And why does the Torah do that? What I want to sort of suggest, and then I'll stop, is that what I'm trying to demonstrate is that perhaps the Torah does that for multiple reasons, but one of which is that because Sinai is complex, because the revelation of the great Anochi, right, is something that words can't quite encapsulate. The only way to really encapsulate that is to try to offer it in through a multitude and a multiplicity. Right? God speaks one, and we hear two. Right, as the story, as the Midrash says, right, that God prevents Sinai like this, and then like that. I put up an image of a diamond on the source sheet. I don't usually do images, but I wanted to just offer that because that's what the diamond is. It's one diamond, but as you turn each of its faces, each of which is beautiful in its own right. This is not an anti-Mishkan or a pro-Mishkan. This is not about that, right? The flickering flame, the Eshochelet, the minor, right? Now, each of these facets and faces put together in the aggregate creates that diamond. And Sinai is complex. This is something This is something that Chazal very much understood. That Sinai is complex, and Sinai is actually, in a sense, it's more than one. Perhaps even this is where Chazal got the idea, and the Hasidim really get the idea that Sinai happens every day. Right? It's always happening, and it doesn't come from nowhere. Actually, maybe right. They're understanding that there's multiple Sinai. Different Sinais need to be heard, I'd say, differently at different times. And I'll just leave you with a final thought, which is that perhaps I'm drawn today to focus on the Sinai of the Sneh and the Sinai we just read here, the simplicity, because with all respect and reverence for the great Sinai of the sound and the fury, I don't know. We live in a world today of quite a lot of sound and fury, of quite a lot of what lahavdil, of the influencers, right, of the bombastic, of the golden, the golden crusted rooms. The Sinai of the simplicity needs to be heard as well. Right? The Sinai of the flickering flame, of the Anochi, Imo Anochi V'Tzara, the Sinai of I am the God, the same God of the forefathers, the foremothers is the God of this people. I heed those who are oppressed. I redeem them, and then you live a life of true freedom by coming to Sinai. Depends on when we live. So let me pause and just hope that we can all hear that call of Sinai. We can all hear together whichever Sinai we need to hear this year. And I hope that this has sort of deepened our approach to Zman Matan Toratenu. So anyone who needs to go, thank you for being with us. Chag Sameach. Those who want to stay, I actually love to hear. What are you thinking? What are you hearing? And I'll stay on for a few minutes.
I would like to thank you so much for this. It was so rich and so much to think about. And I hope I remember 10% of it. I will be 100% ahead, even though I took notes.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
And
And what I really hope is that now when you read the Chumash again, Hafoch v'Hafoch ba, you'll uncover more and more Sinai. Yes, you want to say something else though? Yes, Azella, you were saying
No,
something?
yeah, I mean, this was beautiful, and I kept thinking transcendentalists. This is the idea of being in a lone space that's possibly hefker, that where the noise is gone and the outside influence is gone, and allowing yourself to feel the moment and feel the presence of something way beyond you. This was beautiful. Thank you so much. Really.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to learn with you and with all of you. And whatever the true etymology, whatever true historical etymology of the word midbar, desert, is, you can look into that, language of sort of leading and driving, or language of maybe pestilence. But certainly in our tradition, there are those who choose to read it as a place of, like that form is a mitbach, is a place of slaughter, mikdash is a place of sanctity, midbar would be a place of dibor, of speech. So whether that's a historically sort of a accurate etymology, I can say again, having just been in the desert in silence for a little bit, truly it is a place of speech. The sound of silence. Truly, it can be a place of speech.
Yeah. Rabbi John, thank you so
Yeah.
much for this. Also for the first time of expanding or not expanding, removing or getting rid of the idea that there is only one place or one time, especially, but now with this is place. There is it wasn't just one time at that one place. Well, it was a one place, but the Sinai is here, there, everywhere, and the revelation comes in different waves. Moshe has that's an individual, just one-on-one, and then at Mara we have the entire people, and then. But you can't really put your finger on when it happened. It was all over the place, just as we don't really have a date when it happened. So this is it feeds into that. It's not one place and it's not one time.
Exactly.
This is beautiful today. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Thank you. Pleasure to be with you all.
And I love the diamond.
You love what? Sorry?
The diamond.
The diamond. Okay, good. Okay, thanks everybody. Chag Sameach. See you again. With best wishes for a joyous one and also a peaceful one. May we have peace.
Amen.
May we have peace.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Kayla. Bye, everybody. Chag Sameach.
Bye.
Bye-bye.